Welcome, everyone, to the 6th Distinguished Lecture for the Faculty of Humanities and Education, entitled Jamaican Music at Home and Abroad, Keeping the Circuits Grounded. We are delighted to have you as part of this momentous experience and hope that you will be entertained, engaged, and informed by today's proceedings. We especially want to recognize as an important part of those participating in this special event, our Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, Professor Webinti Wariboko, the Director of the Institute of Caribbean Studies, Dr. Sonia Stanley Nair, our distinguished lecturer, Professor Kenneth Bilby from the Department of Anthology at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and faculty members from the ICS who will be participating in today's program. We also want to extend a warm welcome to our Deputy Deans and our Vice Dean, Dr. Joseph Farquharson, Dr. Carmel Roof, and Dr. Nicole Plummer. We welcome two other members of faculty and the wider university community, both from the academic and administrative domains. Once again, we also want to welcome you from wherever you are, at whatever time it is across the globe, and thank you for having taken the time out to be virtually present with us for this occasion. Established in 1987, the Institute of Caribbean Studies is known for its cutting-edge programs across both the undergraduate and postgraduate levels. Currently at the undergraduate level, the Institute, under the leadership of Dr. Sonia Stanley Nair, has attracted students and scholars locally, regionally, and internationally through programs like the BA in Cultural and Creative Industries, coordinated by Dr. Deborah Hickling-Gordon, and the BA in Music and Performance Studies, coordinated by Dr. Ray Hitchens. At the graduate level, the Institute has produced over 40 graduates across the areas of music, fashion, sport, Rastafari, dancehall, gender, entertainment management, and creative industries. I will now call on our Dean, Professor Webinti Wariboko, to bring you further greetings.
Thank you, Aisha. On behalf of all academic and administrative colleagues in the Faculty of Humanities and Education, I very wholeheartedly welcome our special guest, Professor Kenneth Bilby, who very kindly agreed on short notice to deliver the 6th Annual Faculty Distinguished Lecture, Jamaican Music at Home and Abroad. Because of your intellectual and social credentials, the faculty feels truly honored and delighted that you are delivering this lecture. In addition to your intellectual credentials, most of us have also seen and read about you as a friend of the Monarch campus, and more interestingly, as an avid lover of Jamaican music. On this basis, as a friend, I wish to say, Professor Bilby, welcome to Jam Rock Online. With the same warmth and felicitation, I welcome all undergraduates and graduate students of this faculty, especially those in the BA Music and Performance Studies program in the Institute of Caribbean Studies. This lecture, above everyone and everything else, is meant to foster your academic and social development, as well as promote the BA Music and Performance Studies program. Aside from colleagues and students within the faculty, Sonia had advised me that invitations were also extended to academic institutions, professional bodies, and individual colleagues outside of the Monarch campus and the Caribbean. I therefore also wish to very formally welcome those persons who have accepted our invitation to participate in this august event. The Distinguished Lecture Series among other things, have highlighted the cutting-edge research and curriculum developments taking place in the Faculty of Humanities and Education since its inception 5 years ago. Previous lectures covering themes in cultural and creative industries, as well as in information communication technology, have been published to support teaching and learning. I'm sure that Jamaican music at home and abroad, the sixth distinguished lecture, whilst more broadly promoting the scholarship of Jamaican music and culture, will certainly contribute to the growing list of prescribed and/or recommended readings in the BA Music and Performance Studies program. Let me close by thanking a few persons, although I know there'll be a formal vote of thanks. Professor Bilby, whose acceptance of our invitation has made it possible for this august audience online to look forward to an evening of very, very fine scholarship. Dr. Sonia Nea, Director of the Institute of Caribbean Studies, who prevailed on Professor Bilby to accept the invitation on short notice. And finally, my academic and administrative colleagues in the faculty who have worked so assiduously to make this event happen. To all of these persons, I'd say thank you.
We now will invite Dr. Nicole Plummer, Associate Dean of Outreach and Marketing and lecturer in the ICS, to introduce our distinguished lecturer.
It is my honor to introduce our guest speaker today, esteemed anthropologist and ethnomusicologist, Professor Kenneth Bilby. Professor Bilby earned his first degree at Bard College, his Master's of Art in Anthropology and Ethnomusicology at Wesleyan University, and his PhD in Anthropology at the Johns Hopkins University. In 2004, he received the Guggenheim Fellowship for his work in Jamaican music ethnography. Professor Bilby is currently a research associate at the Smithsonian Institution. He previously taught at Bard College, Regis University, the University of Colorado, and John Jay College of Criminal Justice. For almost 50 years, he has studied various genres of Jamaican music and carried out ethnomusicological fieldwork in various parts of the Caribbean and West Africa. The author of several journal articles and texts. His publications include Words of Our Mouth, Meditation of Our Heart, Pioneering Musicians of Ska, Rocksteady, Reggae, and Dancehall, and with Peter Manuel and Michael Largely, Caribbean Currents, Caribbean Music from Rumba to Reggae. He has written in non-musical areas, the titles of which include True Born Maroons, and with Jerome Handler, Enacting Power, the Criminalization of Obeah in the Anglophone Caribbean, 1760 to 2011. With this impressive resume, please join me in welcoming Professor Bilby.
Greetings, everyone. I want to begin my presentation with a few brief impromptu remarks. I want, first of all, to thank the University of the West Indies for this invitation to present this lecture. For me, it's a special honor. The honor is really mine to be invited to speak in this context, so many years after beginning seriously to explore Jamaican music and culture. When I first started out on this path, I was really still a youth finding my way, and the University of the West Indies helped to shape me. I actually considered attending UWI as an exchange student, and I spent some time investigating the possibilities. In the early 1970s, which was the time I was doing this, it was a heady and politically charged time. And I remember very well having several serious discussions with students at the university on campus, discussions about things such as the eminent historian Walter Rodney, who once taught at the university. So these experiences made me much more conscious of things that I was to go on to explore later on. So I want to give thanks to the university for the help it has given me over time, and for all the work its scholars have produced over the years, which has provided me with a lot of inspiration. I've learned much from the scholars who've been formed by the University of the West Indies. One other thing I wanted to mention beforehand, I just wanted to take note of the loss of several very important musicians and artists who have been active, who've been playing important roles in the Jamaican music world from way back. This has been a particularly terrible year, of course, for much of the world, and Jamaica has also suffered a good deal. And so I wanted to mention the names of a few important Jamaican musicians and individuals we've lost over the last year. And these include, and some of these actually we lost to COVID, not all of them. These include Bob Andy, Toots Hibbert, Bunny Lee, Millie Small, Albert Griffiths, Hux Brown, U-Roy, Neville Livingston, aka Ja B or Bunny Wailer. And I think most of these names will be known to real reggae aficionados, but there are others who probably are not even known to most reggae lovers. So I wanted to mention one individual, Ranford Williams, otherwise known as Ronnie Bop. And I mentioned him, he died only a few weeks ago on April 22nd, 2021. And I mention Ronnie Williams because he was actually a critically important musician, a guitarist who helped to shape reggae guitar from the very beginning of early reggae. He was a critical actor, and very few people have heard of him. But trust me, if you ask those who were there at the time making this music in the studios, virtually all of them will recognize Ronnie Bop as an important contributor. And Ronnie Bop, I just wanted to mention, I had the privilege of interviewing him many years ago, and I discovered that he grew up in the countryside in the area around Spanish Town, and he was deeply immersed in the Jamaican culture of revival. For instance, his family were participants in a revival church. He himself was a participant. He played several of the instruments in a revival church for years as a youth. And he also had much experience with mento music. And he ended up transferring these experiences to the music that he helped to create in the very earliest years of reggae in the mid to late 1960s. So I see him as an exemplar of the many unheralded musicians who helped to create this music, which is now entirely global and who have received very little attention, certainly not what they deserve. So I would like to dedicate this presentation to Ranford Williams, Ronnie Bop. And also, I would like to dedicate it to Garth White, an elder and a true pioneer in the study of Jamaican music, and the study of Jamaican music, particularly in cultural and historical context from a Jamaican perspective. So I livicate this talk to Ronnie Bop and Garth White. So I'll begin by saying that this presentation is divided into two parts, which I call Home and Abroad. So part one, Home. In 1974, on the brink of international stardom, Bob Marley set to song one of his most crucial messages. In his paean to the newly ascendant Rastafari youth movement, Natty Dread, he intoned the following words: "Children, get your culture, or the battle will be hotter." In putting together the classic album on which this song appeared, Marley heeded his own sage advice. He approached a particularly respected elder, an authority, from his own cultural tradition. Lloyd Clayton, better known as Brother Job or Baba Job. Brother Job was acknowledged as a key figure in the emergence of Nyabingi, the true music of Rastafari worship, which grew out of an older African-based Jamaican drumming tradition known as Buru. Job was a master drummer who had learned at the feet of another man named Wata King, a drum builder and Buru drummer originally from rural St. Catherine Parish, who is widely credited with helping to inspire the birth of the new Nyabingi style out of the older sounds of Buru. Just as Brother Job had been apprenticed to an earlier master, he had eventually taken on an apprentice of his own, Oswald Williams, better known as Count Ozzy. It was Count Ozzy who, starting in the late 1950s, played an important role in bringing the drum-based traditional music of Rastafari into the studios where Jamaican popular music was born. Ozzy is still revered today as one of the founding pillars of Nyabingi music, but it was to Count Ozzy's teacher, Brother Job, that Marley turned for the Natty Dread sessions, not to Ozzy himself. In other words, in reclaiming his culture, Marley went to the very source. In 2002, I had the good fortune to meet and interview Brother Job. According to Job, when Marley and he were on the way to Harry J's studio for the Natty Dread session that day in 1974, Bob told Job that, and I quote, "He ma plant the seed for when it grow. When the seed grow, every man will reap." So, him words was to hold the faith for better things coming. Brother Job did his part in planting this seed by playing the repeater drum on the tracks Revolution, Rebel Music, and Dembele Full, three of Marley's most trenchant and forceful critiques of Jamaica's harsh post-colonial reality at that time. Unfortunately, Job was never credited for this contribution, either on the album liner notes or anywhere else that I know of. It is not surprising that Bob Marley, in preparing one of his most important projects, would seek out a founding elder like Brother Job, even if the latter was little known outside the core Rasta enclaves of West Kingston. It was not just that Job represented about as deep a link as one could find to the African-Jamaican roots of Rastafari and Nyabingi music. Just as importantly, Marley had known Brother Job personally for some time as an important individual within the larger network of drummers that formed part of the greater West Kingston Rasta community, to which Marley had many ties. Marley even had his own personal nickname for Brother Job. He called him Jamo, a reference to Kenyan anti-colonial leader Jomo Kenyatta. We need to keep such largely hidden histories in mind when thinking about what Marley meant when he sang, as he so often did, about roots. These certainly included the ancient African roots divined by Rastafari elders through inspired reinterpretations of the Bible. But the roots that were significant, both for Marley and for so many of his musical contemporaries, went well beyond those explicitly associated with the newfound Rasta consciousness that had taken hold of Jamaica at the time, particularly the youth of Jamaica. In an interview in 1980, Marley said, and I quote, "If you go to the countryside with a tape recorder, you find the music of the hills. It's different from the commercial music. Once you record in a studio, that's commerce, that's business. Music is the chant of the earth. If you listen to it, nature is music, and music is there for changes. It brings the strength of the rhythm to the people." Given such words from the man himself, it would be a disservice to Marley to ignore the larger and older traditional Jamaican culture that had a marked impact on him, both as a child and an adult. During the same year that Natty Dread was recorded, 1974, I made my first field recordings in Jamaica, in the town of St. Anne's Bay. Soon after this, I set off for the countryside with a tape recorder to find the music of the hills, as Marley put it. In fact, I soon ended up by chance in the very area where Marley was born and grew up, in the hills of rural St. Anne Parish. Let's listen to a few of the recordings I made around that time, some of them just a mile or two from 9 Mile, his village of origin. First, a round dance played by a village band. This is an example of country mento music of the kind Marley would have heard as a boy growing up nearby. In fact, several of the musicians on the recording knew Marley personally, since they belonged to the same larger community that 9 Mile was a part of, known as Calderwood, and pretty much everybody in this small rural district knew everybody else. Now let's listen to another of my early field recordings made around the same time in the same general area in the hills of St. Anne, in a small rural district in the vicinity of the market town of Brownstown. Even though the recording was made in a tiny shack in a small rural village with a portable generator as the only source of electricity, you will notice that the track is in full-blown 1970s style reggae. These two recordings not only tell us something about Bob Marley's local roots, but more importantly, they reveal certain deep tendencies in Jamaican music. First, they reveal the interconnectedness of the many different realms of musical life that exist in Jamaica. This becomes clear when we learn that some of the same musicians playing on the first recording, which is in an old mento style used for village dances, are also present on the second recording, which is in the emergent reggae style of that time. For example, the man playing highly skilled banjo on the mento recording is the same musician who plays electric bass guitar on the reggae recording. He was equally comfortable in both settings. Moreover, the lead singer on this rural reggae recording, Wesley Nelson, although he grew up and was still living in a small country village nearby, was a veteran of the Kingston studios who had lived in the city for a while and contributed as a backup singer to a number of hit songs produced by the incomparable producer Lee Scratch Perry in the late 1960s. Another tendency these recordings reveal is the acute sensitivity of music makers everywhere in Jamaica to the experience of social injustice, a reality that burns like a red-hot thread through the historical fabric of their country. Jamaica, after all, was for most of its existence one of the most brutal slave plantation colonies, not only in the British Empire, but in the world. The lyrics of the rural reggae song we just heard are about a kind-hearted country Rastaman, Bongo Nati, who tries to help a neighbor in need, but ends up being beaten up by the police when they discover some ganja in his hut. The story relates an entirely common occurrence during that era, not just in depressed urban neighborhoods, but in rural villages. It was, of course, the Rastafari movement that crystallized consciousness of social injustice and helped to make it the focus of so much Jamaican popular music, beginning in the late 1960s or earlier. And this has continued to be the case for a great deal of Jamaican-inspired popular music in other parts of the world since then. It is important to remember, though, that Rastafari in Jamaica is intimately connected to and partly rooted in a number of older local cultural and musical traditions. And these specifically Jamaican musical roots have supplied much of its power to move listeners. Let's take two more examples from my 1975 field recordings in rural St. Anne Parish. The first was made during a church service in the spiritual tradition known as Poko, or revival, an African Jamaican religion that began to take shape during the era of slavery. This tradition, which blends African-derived concepts and musical practices with ideas introduced more than a century and a half ago by Christian missionaries, is found across the island and still forms part of the bedrock of the country's so-called folk culture. The particular traditional revival song I am now going to play, known as Press Along Saints, recognizes the adversities that have continued to face the majority of Black Jamaicans throughout the country's history and encourages fellow worshipers to push ahead and maintain the faith until things are set right. Press along, saints, press along in God's own way, say the lyrics. Persecution you might bear, trials and crosses into your way, but the hotter the battle, the sweeter the victory. Some of you might recognize this last phrase as one that Bob Marley borrowed for some of his own compositions, such as his song The Heathen on the Exodus album. Following my 1974 field recording made during the revival service, I will play an early reggae version of the same song by the singer Larry Marshall, who, like Bob Marley, hails from the hills of rural St. Anne Parish. Larry Marshall is also known as the composer and singer of one of the earliest reggae songs, some argue the very first ever recorded, a song titled Nanny Goat. In the reggae version of Press Along Saints that follows, Marshall gives the song a new Rastafarian thrust, singing Press Along Naya in Jah own way, but the rest of the old revival lyrics remain intact. I'll now play the two recordings back to back without interruption. Many such examples of continuity between revival music and Rastafarian music, both traditional and popular, in my work. Let's consider just a few more. We will start with another field recording of a traditional revival song that I made in a small country church in St. Anne in 1975, this time in yet a different part of the parish. The song, "Awake Zion, Awake and Trim Your Lamps," directs the people's consciousness to the biblical promised land to which the souls of the faithful will be delivered, which in the Rastafarian rereading was to become the original homeland of Ethiopia, or more generally, continental Africa, rather than a heaven beyond earth. Following my field recording is Burning Spear's reggae version from 1971, which retains most of the original lyrics, but emphasizes the Rastafarian land where the milk and honey flows, to which the faithful will be repatriated. Burning Spear, otherwise known as Winston Rodney, is, like Bob Marley and Larry Marshall, a son of St. Anne Parish, and is known especially for his championing of the great anti-colonialist thinker and advocate of Black pride, Marcus Garvey, who was also a native of St. Anne. Garvey, of course, is now officially recognized as one of Jamaica's national heroes. Finally, we'll hear a radically remade version of this revival song by Peter Tosh, Bob Marley's friend and musical colleague and longtime collaborator in the Wailers. In Tosh's version, which appeared a year after Burning Spears, the call to Awake Zion has changed to Arise Black Man. Militant as always, Tosh urges listeners, arise, black man, arise. Arise and know thyself. We've been sitting in the dirt too long, and it seems we don't know when we right or wrong. But help me sing my song, black man, arise. At another point, he continues with, remember, we came down here as slaves, and declares, the time of rights is now, and you don't have to ask me how. You've got to make a move, black man, arise. The song includes many other expressions of Rastafari consciousness. He finishes by invoking an old Jamaican proverb, singing, every man on earth is a man, and every tub has to stand on its own bottom. No matter where you're from, black man, arise. Even while giving this old revival song a new life with these explicitly youth-oriented lyrics set to a reggae rhythm, he retains the old-time prophetic language of the original, warning ominously that the moon shall turn into blood, and the rivers turn into flood, and the sun will never shine. Black man, arise. Let's now listen to these three different versions of the same Jamaican traditional revival song, one after the other.
Arise, black man, arise. sail right now. Arise, black man, arise. Arise and know thyself, for the moon shall turn into blood, and the rivers turn into flood, and the sun will never shine. Black man, arise. Arise, black man, arise. Arise and know thyself. Arise, black man, arise. Arise and know thyself. Remember we came down here as slaves, and to get a little job you have to trim and shave. Your heaven becomes your grave. Black man, arise. Arise, black man, arise. Arise and know thyself. Arise, black man, arise. Arise and know thyself, for the time of rights is now, and you don't have to ask me how. You got to make a move. Black man, arise. Arise, black man, arise. Arise and know thyself right now. Arise, black man, arise. Arise and know thyself. Every man on earth is a man, and every tub have to stand on its own bottom. No matter where you're from, black man, arise. So arise, black man, arise.
You may have noticed the improvisations of a Rastafarian hand drum weaving through Tasha's song. This drum, the repeater, is a direct descendant of the Buru tradition, Buru drumming tradition I mentioned earlier when talking about Brother Job's participation in Bob Marley's Natty Dread sessions. This Buru tradition deserves a bit more attention, not only because it lies at the base of the Rastafari Nyabingi drum tradition, which, as we know, has had a massive influence on reggae music as a whole, but because it made some of the earliest contributions to the birth of a distinctive Jamaican popular music through a process of musical indigenization, which at the time remained largely hidden to purveyors of the musical mainstream in Jamaica. As it happens, the same Brother Job who played on the Natty Dread sessions was behind one of the earliest post-mento records made in Jamaica, and this recording was in a style virtually uninfluenced by the U.S. rhythm and blues that was to play such a big part in the emergence of Jamaican ska. So in the next photo, a 1953 photo here, I believe it is actually Baba Job, a young Baba Job at the lower left, holding a Buru repeater drum. According to Clive Chin, this recording that I'm going to play was possibly the very first production undertaken by his father, the famous record producer and studio owner Vincent Randy Chin, and dates back to 1958 or 59. Brother Job on the Buru repeater drum led the session, which included a number of important figures in Kingston's emerging popular music scene, such as the singers Bunny and Skidder, the trombonist Rico Rodriguez, and trumpeter Dizzy Johnny Moore. Let's give the record a listen.
Vamos
Basically a kind of buru-driven jam session with mento components revolving around a traditional Jamaican ring play tune, the record may seem surprising in a number of ways. For one thing, as already mentioned, it shows virtually no influence from the US-style rhythm and blues with which local producers and sound systems were smitten at the time. More interestingly, it features a kind of proto-reggae rhythm, some 7 or 8 years before the emergence of reggae proper, in or around 1968. Indeed, before even full-blown ska had come onto the scene. But this was not the only record of its kind before and during the period when ska was rearing its head. There were many more obscure records from this time featuring buru-based fusions and other such experiments than is generally recognized. Oh Carolina, the famous record by the Folks Brothers and Count Ozzy, gets all the attention and credit because it was such a mammoth hit in Jamaica, and because Shaggy had a worldwide pop hit with his cover of it in 1993. But it was hardly the only example of obvious musical indigenization during this early stage in the development of Jamaican popular music. This largely hidden portion of Jamaica's musical history, I believe, contains some of the keys to understanding how the country's indigenous musical expressions were able to resurface with full force immediately before and after independence in 1962, as the first attempts at cultural decolonization took shape. Brother Job, the original Buru Nyabinghi master, was but one of many unheralded musicians who contributed to this process of musical indigenization, both inside and outside of the studios. It was only in the year 2000 that I came to realize that older versions of the Buru tradition predating the Rastafari movement remained vital in some areas of Jamaica, and that these carried deeper meanings than generally recognized. I had previously read and had also heard from some older Rasta drummers that in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, it had become a tradition for Buru drummers in West Kingston to organize processions and assemble at the penitentiary gates to greet and celebrate the release of prisoners who had finished their terms. As many of these prisoners were victims of Jamaica's harsh anti-ganja laws and other repressive colonial-era policies, these African-identified Buru celebrations projected a clear anti-colonial stance, which is part of the reason why they were so appealing to the early Rastafari who lived alongside them in the squalor of West Kingston shanty towns. But I did not know that in its older rural incarnations, Buru was, and still is, a spiritual tradition revolving around the veneration of local ancestors. Although practiced throughout the year, its most important celebration takes place on December 25th, Christmas Day, when groups of musicians and dancers parade the streets and lanes all day long, stopping at the yards of revered deceased Buru practitioners along the way to make offerings of music and rum at their graves. On Christmas Day 2004, I joined one such Buru procession in St. Catherine Parish for an entire day, following along and videotaping key parts of the celebration at the group's invitation. In this community, it's known locally as Buru Day, a designation that has more weight in the community than the European concept of Christmas Day. Let's watch 2 brief clips from this day. In the first one, the Buru procession visits and makes offerings at the grave of a deceased master drummer from the community. The segment ends with the group singing, call them, Ol Sumali, mi wan funde, Ol Sumali," meaning, call them, the old ancestors. I want to hear the funde drum, old ancestors. In the second clip, a large crowd from throughout the community that has gathered toward the end of the day marches down one of the town's main thoroughfares while singing an old song that is said to date back to the slavery era, Bring me half a hoe, come give me a. I'll play the 2 clips back to back now. I'm ending my discussion of Jamaican music at home with this particular clip because the song performed on it is an old and deeply meaningful one, and it too is part of the story of Jamaican traditional and popular music, running through many different genres and periods. The repeating chorus goes, "Bring me half a hoe come gimmea," or "Carry me half a hoe come gimmea," meaning "Bring me my broken digging tool." And the line sung between choruses says, "Bushawami figo plant bitieta," or "plant banana," meaning the overseer wants me to plant sweet potatoes, or as the case may be, banana. In its own way, this old song, which has been performed variously as a buru song, a work song, a ring game song used at wakes, or a mento dance song, is capable of evoking the memory of misery and injustice of slavery as powerfully as Burning Spear's classic 1975 reggae song, Slavery Days, which insistently poses the question, do you remember the days of slavery? Here are a few other versions of this old folk song in a number of different styles and genres. These include a field recording of a buru group from a different parish that I made in the year 2000, a field recording of an informal musical gathering made by a Jamaican linguist, Frederick Cassidy, in 1952, a studio recording of a mento group that was released on a Jamaican record label for the local market in the 1950s, and finally, a field recording made on an Edison cylinder more than 100 years ago, around 1920, by the pioneering ethnomusicologist Helen H. Roberts. So let's cycle without interruption through these 4 different versions of the same very old Jamaican song, "Bring Me Half a Hoe" or "Carry Me Half a Hoe."
Bring me half a walk on, come give me a, bring me half a walk, give me a, bring me half a walk, go to a mountain, bring me half a walk, come give me a, which I want to sing up like theater, bring me half a walk, come give me a, which I want to sing up like Bomba Young, bring me half a walk, come give me a, bring me half a walk, me know you divide, bring me half a walk, come give me a, bring me half a walk, me know you know my day, bring me half a walk, come give me a, which I want to sing up like theater, bring me half a walk, come give me a.
One could argue that all the musical examples I have presented here contain at least the germs of an anti-colonial consciousness, even those in which no sign of protest is evident on the surface. Anyone who is well read in Jamaican history will understand this argument, for the colonial violence that pervades the history of the island is not limited to the grotesque punishments inflicted on the human body in previous centuries to make possible a brutal system of chattel slavery. It extends to the violence against the psyche and the soul that psychologist Frantz Fanon teaches us of. Along with economic oppression and racial discrimination, both physical and mental violence continue to be fundamental to the logic of colonialism long after the legal abolition of slavery in Jamaica. Under this logic, the Black and poor majority, by definition, were bereft of culture. Nothing they were capable of creating themselves could have any value. In this ideological climate, the very existence of a vital vernacular culture, including musical culture, which had not only survived over time, but had flourished and continued to grow, bespoke a resilient and resistant population. The survival not only of the subjugated people themselves, but of the vibrant cultural expressions they had created in the face of such adversity was a precondition for the beginnings of decolonization. Bob Marley made a point of stressing that survival of both body and spirit, individually and collectively, what some people now call survivance, is key. Perhaps the most obvious example of this was one of his most powerful albums, titled simply Survival, the original title of which, in fact, was to have been Black Survival. So now we move to part 2, Abroad. How do we connect this brief journey into Jamaica's inner spaces and some of its deepest musical roots to the phenomenal outward surge of reggae across the planet? Some years ago, while directing research programs at the Center for Black Music Research in Chicago, I launched a preliminary investigation into the globalization of Jamaican music. Here is some of what I learned. At this point, I know of roughly 4,000 recording artists, both bands and solo artists, around the world, and this is not including Jamaica, mind you, who have recorded music in reggae style or made reggae one of their favorite genres. This number is far from complete, but represents a good-sized sample. For a majority of these 4,000 artists, reggae is, in fact, their primary genre, and a substantial percentage perform reggae exclusively. The 4,000 plus singers and musicians represented on this list include citizens of virtually every member state of the United Nations. While it is true that a certain portion of the reggae produced outside of Jamaica caters to shallow touristic fantasies of tropical sun and fun, or becomes a kind of characterless grab bag of exotic sounds aimed at Western buyers of so-called world music, the making and reception of reggae in other parts of the world is greatly more complicated than this. This is especially true if one looks beyond the mainstream multinational music industry and its big-selling megastars, who themselves have not been immune to Jamaican musical influences, but who tend to incorporate these, if at all, as a kind of decontextualized flavor, devoid of deeper meanings. In my preliminary survey of globalizing reggae, I have found examples of reggae songs in more than 200 languages. I'm going to say that again, 200 languages. This still amazes me. In fact, this number is not an accurate reflection of the actual number of languages represented in my sample, since it includes only those examples I was able to identify with some confidence. Since I have yet to identify the languages of some of my examples, I have no doubt that the number will go up with further research. In any case, this limited collection of reggae songs from around the world tells us something remarkable. Not only are most of the major world languages represented in this sample, but so are many languages and dialects spoken by smaller numbers of people, including various indigenous and endangered or vulnerable languages. These include, just to take a few examples, the Ainu language of Japan, the Arborish dialect of Albania, Lele in Guinea and Burkina Faso, Urhobo in Nigeria, Innu in Canada, Jalagi, the language of the Cherokee people of North Carolina, Dehu in New Caledonia, Garifuna in Central America, Dani in Papua New Guinea, Mapuche in Chile, Mayan and Huichol in Mexico, Yawalipite in Brazil, Teco, Wayana, Wayampi, and Aluku in French Guiana, Samaka and Okanisi in Suriname, and one could go on and on. There are dozens more from various parts of the world. We can see from a survey such as this that many people around the world have embraced reggae, not only as something modern and attractively cosmopolitan, but as a way of reconnecting with older traditions that have been challenged by various historical and contemporary forces, a kind of pathway into the deeper collective self. In colonized parts of the world, where the existence of legitimate pre-colonial or indeed independent post-colonial identities has sometimes continued to be denied, and where long-standing social and cultural differences have been suppressed and threatened with eradication, this assertion of deeply rooted identities in popular music may be seen as a profoundly decolonizing move. As the Native American singer Emmett Garcia of the North American band Native Roots once said in an interview, reggae, fused with American Indian music and culture, offers a particularly effective platform for celebrating the fact that, to quote the lyrics of one of his songs, Native Indian people have survived. Reggae has been used in this way by indigenous and minority peoples for a long time, in fact. As early as the late 1970s and 1980s, inspired largely by Bob Marley, Aboriginal reggae bands began to emerge in Australia and Maori reggae bands in New Zealand. Similar gestures have been long occurring in Europe as well. The Welsh singer Geraint Jarman's adoption of reggae in the late 1970s helped to spur a linguistic and cultural revival in Wales. In France, to take another European example, reggae-based acts such as Massilia Sound System and Moresca Fracas Dub have made substantial contributions to the Occitan cultural and political revival. Basque and Catalan reggae bands have also played their part in ensuring the ongoing health of these minority cultures and languages among the youth. Since then, to judge by the burgeoning presence of global forms of reggae on the web, such processes have continued to multiply exponentially. It seems that people around the world are increasingly responding to Marley's sung advice to get your culture, to return to one's cultural roots as a source of strength in the face of the social and cultural disintegration and spiritual damage caused by a complex concatenation of contemporary economic, social, and political forces, which Rastafari thinkers have long recognized as manifestations of the systematized forms of oppression they know as Babylon. For a better idea of the complexity of globalizing reggae, let's watch and listen to a small sample of video clips featuring reggae or discussions of reggae from a range of different countries and peoples. This is going to be one continuous series of brief clips presenting differing takes on reggae from a wide variety of people and places. So, Reggae Abroad, a sampling.
Reggae music is one of the world's few living folk music. It has remained incredibly popular and spontaneously generated by people's experience, emotion, and traditions.
Chun caint agus chun canna ar na cearnaíní fós tá muid ag seint. Agus é sin ráite, meas tú bhfuil an teachtarach a dhéantar is tí sa ceáil agus an ceáil réige nach go hairíad, a bhfuil sé éireannach de airní mar sin? Tá go mór is chun teachtarach arúnach de gachéin ar dain agus sin an rud faoi réige tá sé le cloisint i ngach chuid den Nashville.
Is the name of the song. It's actually a song that I wrote about, how in Africa people love reggae music. Because even God loves reggae.
I am the Don Dada of the reggae world in Charleston. Big up the O.C. Chandler and the Chandler family, Gullah Family Productions. Been doing this for over 25 years. Give thanks and praises. Yes, I.
What is the Gullah Roots?
Gullah Roots, that's our heritage. The roots with a Z is strong. So we call it the Gullah Roots.
무엇보다 레게 음악이라고 하는 것이 민족의 어떤 전통성을 보여주는 것이라고 한다면은 저희들이 오늘 밤 우리나라의 전통을 레게 음악으로 표현할 수 있지 않을까 그렇게 생각합니다. 오늘 중학간이 아니란 게 걱정 근심 뒤로 하고 이 순간 속에 살아. Don't be sad, don't you hurt your brother. Now is the time to love each other. See one people, one soul. Papua, people united. See one people, one soul. Papua, people get freedom.
I made my choice to leave broke behind and keep my culture strong. 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 Where you going? When I need it. Come back home. Feel where you're going. Yo, listen up. Feel where family one. Come together. Together we can be so strong.
The idea of what it could be used for. And if you were to also see it in alignment with Native Hawaiian sovereignty movements and also the Hawaiian Renaissance, music became, and more specifically reggae music, became this vehicle that I think folks look towards as a way to get their voices heard, but also to more popularize political or politicized music in a way that can also have far-reaching impacts beyond just the community, but also to the island.
What we want is equal opportunity. When you are victoring, when we are struggling. What we want is equal opportunity. Yeah. What we want is equal opportunity. Oh yeah, struggling. What we want is equal opportunity. Oh. Go and tell the savage native that he must be Christianized. Tell him end his heathen worship and you'll make him civilized. Shove your gospel, force your values down his throat until it's raw. And after he is crippled, turn your back and lock the door. Missionaries, missionaries, go and leave us all alone. Take the white God to the white man. We have a way of our own. We are indigenous people. Yes, we are indigenous people. We are Dakota, we are Inca. We are the Zulu, we are Gaelic, Apache and Malinka. Descendants of the great Zimbabwe. We are the Sioux, Aborigines, the real Guanahatabe. Medicina ancestral baita. Haritaburua, Haritaburua. Ha, ha. Winchao. Sinipitabina too. Siento luz en mi alma, siento que calma, siento el amor, siento remedio que sana, remedio bendito me resucitó. Klase-klaseng mga tribo, lain-laing dialekto. Adunay higaunon, talaandig, manubo, matigsalug, tigwahanon, umayam nun. Bukid nun.
This small sample of reggae video clips from beyond Jamaica, which could easily be expanded by adding dozens of others of a similar kind from other parts of the world, merely hints at the global reach of Jamaican music. It doesn't even include other Jamaican popular genres that have spread to other countries, such as ska, rocksteady, or the distinct varieties that have emerged and become dominant in Jamaica itself over the last few decades under the broad label of dancehall. Not because these are not also an important part of the story, but because there's simply no time to deal with this larger picture in the amount of time we have here. Clearly, the wide-ranging assortment of clips we just saw shows that in many parts of the world, local forms of reggae have come to express deep and complex cultural meanings that can only be interpreted and understood properly when placed into local contexts. Yet, these tremendously diverse examples also share a broader frame of reference, along with a common musical language of sorts. Even as they revel in cultural uniqueness, most of them gesture toward themes that have global significance: freedom from exploitation, equal rights and justice, respect for cultural difference, unity instead of division, peace as a primary goal, reclamation of ancestral roots as a source of strength, but not in an ethnocentric or chauvinistic sense. And perhaps most saliently, ways of being both local and global. Perhaps one of the most notable things about these examples is that they show that reggae, in what be called the classic style of the 1970s, is very much alive today. It continues to be made and listened to by young people. In fact, people of all ages across the world, for whom it remains not just enjoyable, but highly meaningful. And perhaps most importantly, it does so for the most part without the backing or the blessing of the multinational corporate music industries, continuing to forge its own paths, largely without regard for the musical machinations of global capital. For every one of the few non-Jamaican reggae artists who have signed with large record companies and achieved international stardom, such as Alpha Blondy or Lucky Dubé, there are dozens of others making powerful and locally meaningful music beneath the corporate radar for reasons of their own. So the crisscrossing circuits traveled by reggae over the last few decades have resulted in a vast array of musically and culturally interconnected or potentially interconnected communities of music makers, listeners, and users. But where does this leave the music's homeland itself, Jamaica? At the very center, I and many of the music's global admirers would argue, Jamaica is already a mecca for reggae musicians from around the world, many of whom manage eventually to travel to Kingston and record in one of the legendary remaining studios. Nonetheless, the country's future relationship with the ever-expanding universe of global reggae remains uncertain. The official inscription of reggae on UNESCO's representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2018 has helped to focus attention on this question. The work of safeguarding and protecting Jamaica's musical heritage continues apace in reggae's birthplace. Even as locally based Jamaican scholars, such as Professors Carolyn Cooper and Sonia Stanley Naya, have reached outward, conceptualizing and organizing global and international reggae conferences, editing and writing studies on the topic of global reggae, and researching reggae festivals as a global phenomenon, they have continued to make vital contributions to the ethnography of Jamaican music in Jamaica. Jamaican cultural institutions, such as the Jamaica Music Museum, under the direction of Herbie Miller, the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Jamaica Memory Bank, and the Reggae Studies Unit of the University of the West Indies at Mona, contain invaluable and growing repositories of musical documentation on Jamaica's historically deep musical culture, waiting to be used for further research. The university is in the process of building an innovative new music program giving ample attention to Jamaica's unique musical heritage. And scholars in Jamaica are collaborating with Birmingham City University in England to develop a state-of-the-art global reggae archive. We may be approaching a crossroads. The growing ethnographic and archival research and collections that could make possible a more complete picture of reggae music's local history may finally receive the increased support they deserve. But so much more remains to be done. So rich and complex is Jamaica's traditional musical heritage. After decades of encountering Jamaican music in its homeland, including working as an ethnomusicologist with rural traditions in every parish of the island, I feel confident in saying that what we know as reggae could have emerged nowhere but in Jamaica. I will leave aside for the moment the very complex question of why this genre, born under very specific circumstances in a particular corner of the Caribbean, has taken on the mantle of a universal music. Whatever angle one views it from, the trajectory of Jamaican music over the last half century is nothing less than astounding, and there is no simple explanation. But it seems clear to me that those seeking better answers than we now have will need to go further and deeper into the source itself. Who, after all, can discount the sense of many non-Jamaican devotees of reggae around the globe that the very sound of the music, as much as its socially conscious lyrics, explains why it has been and remains such an effective vehicle of protest and struggle, as well as a healing agent in the face of adversity and social injustice. Perhaps these listeners can hear and feel in these sounds themselves, even though they lack the specific knowledge to back this up, that this really is, as so many classic Jamaican reggae songs assert, a music that has grown out of deep cultural roots, spiritually potent roots that have been critical to the survival and the sanity of a people historically subjected to one of the most oppressive social and economic systems ever devised by humankind. And this is why I have devoted such a large portion of this talk to these very real roots, the older rural traditions that did, in fact, make an immense contribution to the development of Jamaican popular music. The extensions of these older traditions today, whether obvious or not, continue to nourish popular music in Jamaica, contributing to its ongoing vitality and helping to keep the vast circuits through which reggae travels and takes root abroad, grounded in Jamaica's own rich musical heritage. Reggae music is Jamaica's gift to the world. It seems a particularly valuable gift at this perilous moment in our planet's history, when xenophobia, racism, and the forces of division are once again on the rise, fueled by a barrage of economic, political, and environmental crises, and brazenly stoked by politicians hungry for power. And the lessons of the past seem to be slipping away. Against this bleak reality, any developments in popular music with the potential to connect people across the globe in a culturally respectful and empathetic manner, while also acknowledging local histories and lifeways, should be welcome. Few other musics, if any, have demonstrated this potential as broadly or as effectively as reggae. Let us hope that, as we go forward as a species, a majority of humankind will keep their ears and their spirits open to such life-affirming sounds. In the meantime, give thanks, Jamaica, and I thank everyone who's been listening.
Thank you so much, Professor Bilby. So much food for thought there, so much music for thought there. We will now invite, in this order, our respondents, Dr. Dennis Howard, lecturer from the ICS, Dr. Lisa Tomlinson, lecturer from the ICS, Dr. Ray Hitchens, coordinator, music and performance studies, and Dr. Sonia Stanley Nair, director of the ICS.
Dr. Spencer, the half has never been told. That's a Jamaican saying. And I want to congratulate Professor Bilby on an excellent presentation about our music, in particular reggae. And I will limit my comments to three different areas of the presentation and the importance of the traditional form. And it is evident in all aspects of our lives and all aspects of our music. And it is so important, and it was really outlined and delineated in a very effective way as to the power of the traditional form. And then there's the issue of repetition and continuity. And this has been an enduring factor in the music of Jamaican popular vintage. And the repetition that was exhibited and the continuity that we see from the traditional to the current forms, and even to what we now know as trap dancehall or one beat or dancehall, as Professor indicated that there are different names for the music right now, is important. And I would love to talk about the musical indigenization, because even though there are some movements within the music, and there is always resistance when it seems as if we are taking elements of the music from external sources. And that's nothing new with our music. But we have the traditional form at the foundation, and there is always this new renewal and continuity and regeneration, and also the indigenization of the sound. And it is still important and constant within the music. And finally, I'd love to talk about reggae music as the music of the oppressed, the music of resistance, as evident by the variety and the large numbers of people from all over the world of a particular kind of orientation, more indigenous and more oppressed in some sorts of ways, that are still embracing the music at the non-commercial level. And Professor mentioned an important point that I wrote down even before he mentioned it, that the global capitalist system has really, in a sense, been a gatekeeper of getting reggae to the point where it would be among the top genres in terms of the financial uh, results that can accrue from it. But as we always say in Jamaica, it is more than just music for economic development or economic benefits, but it's the music of the people, and it's the most enduring form of Jamaican music that will continue to play its part in the liberation and the development of peoples of the world. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I just wanted to comment very quickly on your presentation. Thank you very much for a thorough presentation, Dr. or Professor Bilby. I just wanted to speak very quickly to archiving and documenting Jamaican music history. And what I saw in your presentation was very much gearing towards what I like to refer to as, or actually I'm taking from Abigail DeKosnik. She uses a term, is it a rogue archival practice, which I think your presentation speak to, the ways in which we use non-traditional ways of archiving our music history. And I find, or right now in Jamaica, the digital archiving has allowed us this non-conventional ways of documenting our Jamaican popular music history. It's been allowing us to do so in a time where there's been what I could call a shortage of material on not just reggae, but just Jamaican music history on a whole, coming out of Jamaica. So this new ways in which we've been digitizing and using the internet as a platform to facilitate these different types of artifacts. So not just the music, because music is a part of the sound, is a part of the archiving, as Wayne Marshall, ethnographer and DJ Wayne Marshall talks about. He says, this is a part of the archiving. However, the different types of artifacts and how we artifact those in digitally. And this is away from the traditional form, the museum-based. I just want to quickly add, for example, you mentioned the UNESCO, and I find that a platform like the digital archiving, it moves away from that UNESCO, just, they've inscribed reggae music as an intangible cultural heritage deemed worthy of protection. However, it overlooks the tangible artifacts or the material aesthetic that significantly account for the genre of Jamaican popular music, which I saw coming out so colorfully in your presentation. So the colorful photographs, the album cover that you started off with, if I could add cassette tapes and so forth. And to date, we have some digital archiving that is using this non-conventional ways of documenting Jamaican popular music history. For example, the case point, the DHA, which is the Dancehall Archive Research Initiative, founded by Professor Donahoe, which I'm also a member of and research fellow. So this gives the availability of information. So it's housed or resides on Facebook, Instagram, so people could readily go and access archival information, whether it's from the artists themselves or through the panel discussion that we've had throughout the 3 years that we've been that has been developed, or whether it be any other types of artifacts, album cover, music video that you presented as well. So I just wanted to add to that a part of also the way you talked about abroad and that idea of it being disseminating abroad or spreading, that calling for more digital archiving and integrating it into music programs within Jamaica, and also using it as a platform for internship where our young people are able to access, right? Or access, and not just access, but devise these types of archival collection online, not in terms of a library, but in an informal way. And I really think that even a presentation of such becomes that archival mechanism digitally and becomes freely and easily accessible. So this goes beyond, the good old days when we'll be going into field work, whether we enjoyed it or it was tedious, or going through album record store bins or library collection. So this is something that I just wanted to commend you on, the ways in which your presentation flowed within that context of digital archiving, because definitely this itself is digital archiving, and this again is propelling the music abroad. Thank you.
Good evening, friends and colleagues. Professor Bilby, let me first of all congratulate you on a wonderful lecture. I think there's very few other people who could have delivered the breadth of material that you covered in the last 2 hours. And thank you for reminding us of just what a rich well and the traditional music of Jamaica is, and how productive it's been for popular music generally, and a range of other music from around the world. The thing that struck me about your presentation was it reaffirmed basically what the new music and performance program at the University of the West Indies is structured around, which is the first section of that is really looking at in greater detail at what to this point has been, in my view, the tip of an iceberg, meaning the music of this country. And it's really trying to put a research focus for students and scholars of music, and broaden the wide engagement that UWI already has with a section of locally grown scholars who have a musicology and ethnomusicology background. That's one of our focuses. But also when you talk about, you know, where does it leave the homeland? It's really a big question that you raised there, Ken, because one of the challenges that we face in Jamaica right now is where is the music going with the introduction of algorithms that now kind of dictate the way that music is made and how it develops, with the new AI technologies and the deep fakes that exist in music. We have to also engage Jamaican musicians and Jamaican creatives with an understanding of where the Jamaican music of this later in this century is going to be centered. And there's no reason why it still can't go back to that well of traditions, but it's for people who now need to be grounded in the technology and the processor-based ways that we now make music. And it was kind of to my mind, it was a reaffirmation of what we're trying to do in Jamaica. We're at UWI in terms of music and the way that shapes is shaped and kind of engages with that deep tradition that you've highlighted today. So thank you, Professor Bilby. It was wonderful, thoroughly enjoyed it, and hope to see many more like it. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, everyone. It has been my pleasure to be a part of this lecture, and I want to personally thank the organizing team from the Faculty of Humanities for the way in which they latched on to this idea of making this happen in no time flat. In 2018, I asked the pressing question, can Jamaica put music first? And I published this question as a title of an article in the Caribbean Quarterly in 2018. I was really documenting in that article the way in which Jamaica has, to a large extent, ignored the way in which Jamaican music has imprinted Jamaica on the world map. And I want to use this moment to say that Jamaica, with the embarrassment of cultural riches in music in particular, I could need no other evidence than this lecture to make the point again, can Jamaica really put music first? On May 7th, the Institute of Caribbean Studies celebrated 34 years of existence. And only 2 years ago, we introduced the Music and Performance Studies program. I point this out because with the embarrassment of musical riches we have given the world, we are long overdue in getting our act together to engage in research, documentation, and pedagogy on Jamaican music. I can say here that for too long, the interest in research on Jamaican music rested with those friends outside Jamaica who understood more the value of research and documentation, indeed pedagogy, in relation to Jamaican music. And we can't, of course, leave out those who were slaving away at doing the work in Jamaica, particularly at the ACIJ, the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Olive Lewin, Garth White, Cheryl Ryman, who was looking at dance, these folk forms. And while it took some time, we have come a far way with distinctive scholarship on Jamaican music. And I'm proud to say that I'm very much a part of this work, being inspired by people like Professor Bilby. Today, I want to end with the commitment that with our partners and key stakeholders, indeed our friends, we will one day soon deliver a global reggae archive, reggae being used here as the representation of all of Jamaican music, the most popular genre. In fact, we heard the words continuity earlier. We will indeed deliver that product, and we have partnered with Birmingham City University to be able to deliver this global reggae archive. That's one of the most important things to me, that our students in years to come must be able to access spaces for archiving Jamaican music. People from abroad, researchers. Ken has shown us the way that there is commitment. In fact, as I was listening to the lecture, I was receiving comments from a number of persons who made statements like depth and compassion, patience and overstanding, respect and time. Those are the words that were used to characterize the way in which Professor Bilby's work smacks of nothing but deep sensitivity. You can hear the love and commitment in the work that has been done. And I implore our students that are watching, those who are stakeholders, those who might even be in government, who may be listening now, but who may watch this lecture later on. It is high time for us here at home to have the same level of commitment in relation to Jamaican music. Can we really put Jamaican music first? It is time. And so I take, in the spirit of Ken's lecture, the commitment, the respect, the most important depth to be able to carry the work that we have started and to move for generations to come in archiving and documenting our music. Thank you.
This time has indeed been musically stimulating and informative. If we were face to face, I am very sure we would be closing this time off with a nice session at this point in time. Professor Bilby, as we close, let me start by actually offering you a special invitation to still become a part of our student population at the ICS based on your wish so long ago. It is never too late. Thank you so much, Professor Bilby, on behalf of all of us in the faculty, for sharing your research, your thoughts, your recordings, and your livecation in such a clear and inspiring way. We appreciate the role you have played in confirming for us through these historical facts and academic concepts the power and influence and the reach of Jamaican music in both local and international spaces. To our Dean, Professor Waibinte Wariboko, this event is especially important because it is the final distinguished lecture over which you will preside in the capacity of Dean. And that is important to us. Dean, this is a special thank you on behalf of all of us. In the faculty, thank you for your strategy. Thank you for your sustainability, your guidance, and your focus over the past 6 years. Events like this happen because of your vision and planning, and we appreciate that. Nicole Plummer, thank you very much for your introduction. Our respondents, thank you for participating in the key way you did, including Dr. Stanley Naya, who would have 2 capacities here. We thank you for directing the Institute and for leading us into this kind of event, Dr. Naya, and having done such a fantastic job to make it work. Mrs. Sophia Hales Johnson, our faculty administrative officer, and her team, thank you for guiding and assisting, and the team at UWI TV who have managed and guided us through this virtual experience. Thank you to all of you in our virtual audience for joining us in this significant event. You can learn more about the programs at ICS Mona. So long, farewell, one love, walk good.